One of the many reasons why JoJo's Bizarre Adventure remains one of the most beloved franchises in the anime community is its ability to constantly reinvent itself. While the series essentially follows the same template of stand battle of the week in each part, every part features a different cast of characters, narrative goals, locations, and settings, allowing the series to perfectly toe the line and providing the familiar content we come to it for while remaining consistently fresh. Each part has its own distinct identity within the JoJo mythos. However, with 8 parts, it's unavoidable that certain parts would overlap with more similarities. This is most apparent when looking at the most iconic part of the series, Stardust Crusaders, and the most recently adapted part, Golden Wind. You've all read the title. Today we're going to analyze all the elements seen between the 2 parts and explain exactly what it is that Golden Wind does differently to make it almost always the superior version. There will of course be massive spoilers upcoming, so if you haven't finished Golden Wind, I'd advise you to skip this post until you do. Both Stardust Crusaders and Golden Wind's overarching narrative can be broadly summarized as a group of characters must travel across their setting in search for a shadowy villain with an organization of stand users at his disposal that provide the road bumps along the way of their journey to defeat said villain. Bonus points for both stories featuring a damsel in distress as extra motivation for taking down the big bad in the form of Harley and Trish respectively. The main difference between the two is that with Golden Wind, this is simply a broad stroke version of the plot, whereas with Stardust Crusaders, this is the plot. From the second that they set on their journey, there really is no narrative progression in Stardust Crusaders outside of the nods that every villain they defeat inevitably brings them closer to Dio. Due to something of a rotating main cast and some villains recurring throughout, Stardust Crusaders does still manage to convey a sense of journey rather than just an endless gauntlet of stand users, but its mission statement is never altered. No matter who dies or gets added to the crew, it doesn't affect the fact that they're just trying to get to Dio, making Stardust Crusaders feeling the most episodic of pretty much any JoJo part. Conversely, Golden Wind might feature the same broad plot structure. It segments the story through several different narrative goals. After Giorno actually joins Passione, the first task is to simply retrieve Popol's fortune, which leads them to the bigger task of bodyguarding the boss's daughter from La Squadra. Eventually that goal is accomplished, but twist! The boss wants to kill Trish, and Bruno's sticky finger stands against that. Leading to the final segment of the plot, where Team Bucciarati defects from Passione and directly targets the boss, having to deal with whatever stand user he sends after them. Constantly changing the context for which the various fights take place under, lends Golden Wind to have a naturally meatier narrative than Stardust Crusaders, and makes the plot just overall more exciting and interesting. I also want to point attention to the fact that they aren't so neatly segmented, since La Squadra's leader isn't dealt with until after the defection. I love that this thread carries over through different contexts for a few reasons, but for the purpose of story, it makes it all feel more interconnected rather than if it was just neatly dealt with in that one segment then promptly forgotten about. It's another layer to the plot, and one that's a lot more effective than the Stardust Crusaders babysitting for several episodes. The titular JoJo in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is one of the most immediate defining features of every part. Both Jotaro and Giorno come from the same ilk, as in contrast to many of their kin, having much more stoic personalities, with the main difference between the two being that Giorno treats women with respect. But honestly, Giorno's stoicism comes more from his resolve than anything else, and Jotaro is more about exuding a BAMF attitude. Even outside of both personality having that similar thread, both also feature a similar tendency to win fights in unsatisfactory ways with new abilities. At least personally, I find stuff like the babyface resolution to be unsatisfying, and I kinda love Starfinger, but it comes out of freaking nowhere, and the defeat of Justice was equally unsatisfying since it resolved with an ability we didn't know Star Platinum had until he won with it. Even both final encounters revolve around both protagonists getting a power-up, with Sawoldo and Requiem respectively. In this regard, Giorno is a clear winner over Jotaro in my opinion, because Giorno's ability was introduced to have incredibly broad applications and powers from the get-go, and most importantly, they structured the entire final fight around getting a power-up they previously established in detail in order to defeat Diavolo, whereas Stardust Crusaders only provided flimsy foreshadowing the same type of stand method. But the JoJos aren't the actual protagonists of their parts, at least not when it comes to part 3 and 5. Something you'll read a lot if you read up on community posts on JoJo is that Stardust Crusaders felt like Polnareff's Bizarre Adventure, or that Bruno Bucciarati is the true main character of Golden Wind. In Stardust Crusaders, Polnareff carries the emotional weight of the series. He's the one with the most emotional backstory, and the only one with motives outside of just Dio propelling him into action. He does manage to have the arc resolved via revenge in the Hanged Man episodes, yet continues to be the emotional core throughout with his relationships with Al Abdul and Iggy having perhaps the most time dedicated towards actual growth, and certainly having the most dramatic impact on the series. He probably gets the most screen time of any of the Crusaders, especially since Kakyoin is decommissioned for most of the Egypt portion, and Iggy doesn't give a shit. Also, Polnareff has a much more lively personality than Jotaro, so along with the return of Joseph, who isn't as exuberant in his old age, he contributes most of the kind of goofy charm that I love the series for. In Golden Wind's case, Bruno is the leader of Team Butcherati, is a vital part in the backstory of all his comrades, gets his very own story arc of being a zombie, and most notably, his position as leader means that most of the crucial plot moments involving Diavolo center around Bruno, displayed in both his encounter in dropping off Triss and in his meeting with Polnareff. Now, whether or not you actually consider Polnareff and Bruno as the true leads to their part, it's undeniable that Araki definitely positioned these two as the strongest supports, at the very least, secondary protagonists. I mean, they're both the central figure in the penultimate battles of each part. This section isn't about determining which character is better, but rather which has functioned as the better secondary lead, so to speak, and that clearly belongs to Bruno. It's true that Polnareff is given a lot of screen time in comparison to the other Crusaders, arguably even Jotaro himself, but when you stop to analyze what he's actually accomplishing with such screen time, it becomes a lot less impressive. In both the Anubis and Alessi fights, Polnareff's role is essentially to be wolfed so that Jotaro can be the hero and save the day in more dramatic fashion, and Polnareff does get some great content in those fights. I love the moment with the woman following the conclusion of the Alessi fight. Lord knows it wouldn't have been a sweet moment if she was talking with Jotaro, but ultimately his screen time was still ultimately for the benefit of Jotaro. Beyond that, while the fight with Vanilla Ice is quite possibly the most dramatically tense fight in the history of JoJo, his role in the actual climactic battle is closer to a cameo than a full-fledged participant. Admittedly, it's an awesome moment, but it's a very brief segment of a massive fight. Of the remaining Stardust Crusaders at the start of the fight, Polnareff probably has the least screen time and/or importance of the four. Compare this to Bruno. It's not like he doesn't need saving from time to time, but he's never wolfed. There's never a prolonged combat scenario with him fighting some stand user. It's either something where he doesn't fully understand the circumstances like in Rolling Stones or Babyface. In the latter scenario, it's primarily a Giorno battle all throughout, with saving those two as extra stakes. In the Polnareff situations, they begin as Polnareff fights and segue over to Jotaro when it's actually time to win. When it comes time for the final fight, not only does Bruno get the penultimate battle like Polnareff, unlike Polnareff, he is not only instrumental in the final encounter with Diavolo, he is ultimately the one responsible for defeating him. The final fight in Golden Wind isn't structured like a typical climactic battle. It's more of an indirect confrontation where the conflict is trying to secure the arrow from Silver Cherry Requiem first. It was made explicitly clear that securing the arrow equals victory, so once Giorno got the arrow, they had already won. The stuff with Gur isn't the climax of the battle, it's the fallen action. Araki gave the climactic, decided moment of the fight not to Giorno, but to Bruno. Not to mention the actual final act of Golden Wind, while mostly Mista focused, does place a good deal of emphasis on Bruno. Basically, a good amount of the screen time for Polnareff was ultimately in service of Jotaro, and when it came down to the final confrontation, that too was mostly handled by Jotaro, with Polnareff having an important, albeit brief role. Bruno, on the other hand, was given screen time priority over Giorno in one of the most plot-important moments with the initial encounter with the boss, and remains an integral factor whenever Diavolo comes up. And this has a tangible payoff in the final fight, as his sacrifice ensures victory for the good guys. Now, if we can bite the dust back to the section about the Jotagonists for a second. Another trait shared between Jotaro and Giorno are the fact that they are arguably not the true main characters of their parts, with Polnareff and Bruno respectively holding some right to that claim. Wherever you stand on that debate, I find the way Golden Wind implements this a lot more interesting, in a way that it does express Giorno as the main character. Because Polnareff's claim to the throne mostly comes from his screen time and relative emotional depth, Jotaro is still positioned as the main character in very traditional means. He is the only one who can defeat Dio, and he even saves Polnareff's bacon specifically in several instances. In Golden Wind, Bruno gets a lot more plot importance, and while Giorno himself still plays an integral role in everything, a lot of his main character prowess displays itself in less conventional means. In a way, he almost functions more as a bard. We even see the characters themselves comment on the influence that Giorno has had in their life. Like Giorno's ability, he managed to bring life into the lives of those he's encountered, except Fugo, I guess. And of course, the structure of the final fight did feature him, or his stand, delivering the final blow, and we still get to witness Giorno Giovanna achieve his dream and become a true gangsta. Giorno and Bruno's role in the story complement each other in a way that Jotaro and Polnareff never really does. Their roles in the story are mutually beneficial to each other. And that is perhaps the strongest point to why I prefer Giorno as a Jotagonist and Bruno as a protagonist or deuteragonist. But what's a good hero without a villain? Every part of JoJo has a main antagonist to defeat, and as I've alluded to in the story segment, there are certainly similarities between Dio and Diavolo that extend beyond their position as main villain. Like how despite being a presence in the story for most of its duration, their actual design is obfuscated, even though Dio's appearance is well known to anyone who's seen Phantom Blood. Like, there's not that drastic of a difference between the two, but I digress. And they're both essentially commanders over a faction of stand users. Now, I'm not going to try and argue that Diavolo is a better character. Dio is an over-the-top, hammy villain that is endlessly entertaining in his pure evilness. I love seeing him absolutely troll people with the world, though. Now, personally, if we count Doppio as part of Diavolo's character, I'd find Diavolo to be more entertaining, but for the sake of argument, Doppio and Diavolo's souls were separated into different bodies during Silverchair Requiem's attack, meaning that they're clearly separate entities that just happen to inhabit the same body, so I'm not going to directly count my fondness for Doppio in Diavolo's favor. While I won't argue against anyone who finds Dio to be more entertaining than Diavolo, I will argue that Diavolo is the better villain. This isn't even referring to their personality, just in terms of how they are structurally built up. Dio is a decent built-up threat over the course of Stardust Crusaders, but all his appearances are relegated to small snippets of moments until it's time to finally face him. And it works, but it mostly relies on the mystery surrounding him and his powers, as well as the familiarity the viewer has with him, considering this is his second shift as the big bad. Diavolo doesn't have that luxury, but his role in the story makes him a lot more of a menacing threat than Dio. Initially starting off with the depraved execution of Sorbet when they attempt to investigate into Diavolo's identity. It's a lot more gruesome of a fate than JoJo typically shows, and while he didn't do the dirty work himself, that already positioned him as well as building up the threat of those who work under him. But then at the turning point of the series, he takes a proactive role, killing Bruno with his terrifying ability. And yeah, Bruno got better, but we're given a glimpse of just how frightening an encounter with him can be, all while he was able to maintain his secret identity. The fight with Risotto ends in a chilling fashion, with Diavolo displaying his formidable intelligence in order to gain victory. The fact that Diavolo's ability is a looming threat in the second half, so much so that the final fight is all about trying to gain a power-up in order to stand a chance against it, makes the anticipation of the encounter a lot stronger. Even though Dio is likely the bigger threat, I think Diavolo comes across as a bigger one in the context of its arc due to his more proactive nature in the plot. This is also reflective in his body count. He kills Bruno, Abakio, and Naracha, as opposed to Dio, who successfully offs even less Crusaders than his lackey Vanilla Ice manages to. Beyond that, I still feel Diavolo is a better villain due to his role in the story thematically and as a contrast to Giorno. The best villain should in some way reflect off the hero. They need to parallel or operate as an inversion of the heroes in some manner. Look at Joker and Batman for perhaps the most iconic example. And Dio is a good foil for Jotaro. His over-the-top personality nicely contrasts with Jotaro's more cool exterior, and there is a connection with them having the same type of stance, but it's a lot more involved with Golden Wind. The biggest thematic thread is the nature of fate itself, the unchanging result we're all predestined towards. Everything about Diavolo is intrinsically tied to fate. Epitaph allows him to see into the future, granting him time to plan the best course of action, and King Crimson allows him to literally skip to the result, erasing the cause. Obviously, while Team Bucciarati aren't guided by fate, they are still ultimately powerless to change it, as the rejection of the Sleeping Slaves arc showcases, but they have the resolve to challenge it, to live their lives how they best see fit. They're susceptible to fate, but they're not guided by it. Unlike Diavolo, the moment leading up to the results do matter. Their pasts do matter. This contrasts with Giorno blatantly with Golden Experience Requiem, as Ger's power is essentially the inverse. Whereas Diavolo erases the cause and keeps the effect, Ger does the opposite. However, besides their stands, their interactions within their fellow comrades exhibits this too. Diavolo is reliant on Doppio, and while Doppio clearly has affection for the boss, it's a one-sided relationship. Diavolo utilizes Doppio solely for his own benefit and survival. And of course, anyone in Passione who even hints at trying to learn more about him suffers the consequences, leading to instances where an entire faction of his organization defected in the sole hopes of learning his identity and killing him. Contrast this to Giorno's attitude and effect on Team Bucciarati. As Bruno put it, he was reborn thanks to Giorno, and he means that metaphorically, not just literally with the whole zombie thing. There's nothing at all deep to analyze with Dio. He's simply the big bad villain that needs to be stopped, whereas Diavolo operates in tandem with the main theme of the plot, while equally serving as a stark contrast to the ideology of the main cast, particularly Giorno. He may not be as immune confusing as Dio, but I think he fits the role of main antagonist stronger than Dio does. However, the bulk of the combat time isn't spent against the main villains, but rather their ragtag collection of rogues. The Stand of the Week formula means both parts are populated with a multitude of different villains, but which one has the better collection of minor antagonists? Stardust Crusaders actually does have some advantages here that aren't present in Golden Wind, at least in the manga version. There's a number of recurrent villains in Stardust Crusaders: Enya, Boingo, and of course, Hall Horse. They're not all fantastic characters, but it's still a joy to see these characters outside the main cast reappear from time to time. It makes the world feel more cohesive. It makes the journey feel less like a series of unrelated stand battles by incorporating a level of continuity to the battles. I also appreciate Stardust Crusaders' willingness to get a little wacky with Forever, and to a far lesser extent, Petsop. Yet I'm still inclined to give the win here to Golden Wind. If we're going by just the base story presented in the source material, I honestly might have said Stardust Crusaders takes the win here. But David Productions' anime original scenes during episode 10 greatly enhanced La Squadra. In the manga, they were pretty much introduced as they came to fight Team Bucciarati, making them essentially feel like nothing more than the new bad guy to defeat. By incorporating flashbacks that establish them and their personalities before the vast majority of them interact with our heroes, they no longer feel like a series of bad guys to defeat. They felt like characters with their own motivations that just so happened to conflict with our guys. So they still served the same function, but the additional context added a lot. It also made Risotto vs. Doppio a lot more exciting. Even without that though, Golden Wind certainly has some standouts, namely in the duos. Cicolata and Sekko are two of the more unusual villains and stand out greatly due to their personality, powers, design, and weird relationship with one another. Then there's Pesci. The Grateful Dead / Beast Boy train fight is my favorite fight in Golden Wind for numerous reasons, and one of the main one is Pesci himself. It's so rare to see a minor antagonist incur so much character development, and his interplay with Prosciutto can generally be sweet at times. Pesci's arc is one you normally see reserved for the good guys, the brotherly mentor character dying but inspiring, the more timid character to finally gain the confidence to be a threat. Having it happen with the villains makes the battle a lot more engaging. It really feels like a bunch of characters fighting it out rather than simply the good guy and the bad guy they must defeat. Pesci's my favorite minor antagonist outside of Steel Ball Run, and he alone challenges the collection of baddies from Stardust Crusaders. Through the sheer volume of excellent fights, I have no qualms saying JoJo's Bizarre Adventure hosts the best fights in shonen history, and stands up proven to be one of the greatest battle systems ever conceived, second only to Nen in my opinion. This is the bread and butter of the franchise, so it's apparent that both here would feature a plethora of great encounters, but which series has the better fights? It's not even a competition. Golden Wind easily. Stardust Crusaders' early encounters are way too simplistic, which is fair enough considering stands were a brand new concept at that point, but there's too many low points in comparison for it to really stand a chance. And Stardust Crusaders does deliver several of the best stand encounters in the series, with Vanilla Ice, the Darbies, but especially the first one, Petsop, in Death 13 for example, and I love the forays into comedy fights. Albeit, considering Golden Wind doesn't even do those, it seems unfair to count them when I'm just aiming to compare what the two share in common. But even if I did count them, it wouldn't make a difference. But let me make something clear. In terms of pure fight construction, Golden Wind is the peak of JoJo. I admittedly haven't read Part 8 at all, and Steel Ball Run likely has my favorite fights in the series because character drama is that's more heavily into them, but on just a mechanistic level, Golden Wind is easily the most impressive. The power sets are a big reason why, of course, with several fantastic abilities from both sides, with Sticky Fingers being likely my favorite stand period. The insane versatility Bruno's zipper powers prove to have never cease to be exhilarating or clever in their varied applications. However, arguably more important than that is how well the environments are frequently utilized. This is something JoJo always excelled at in contrast to many other battle series. Even in Phantom Blood, the surroundings were as much of a crucial part of the strategy as the actual power sets of the characters involved, and I don't think any part incorporates them as consistently or effectively as Golden Wind. Hell, both Cicolata and Sekko's abilities are both directly tied to geography, and we get several varied battle locations all throughout. Planes, trains, and automobiles are just a few of the select sounds we receive, and they all play an active role in the battle. I can't think of a single encounter in Golden Wind that doesn't, in some fashion, actually use the layout of the land in constructing its battles, and that's why it's easily the victor here. Those small fights are all ultimately built into one gigantic climactic battle against the big bad, and I know what you're thinking. How am I possibly going to argue that Golden Wind's final semi-indirect confrontation with Diavolo tops the absolute juggernaut of an encounter that is the world? I'm not. At the top of the video, I specified that Golden Wind was almost always superior, and this just happens to be the instance where Stardust Crusaders still reign supreme. And that's not to knock the final encounter with Diavolo. It has more thematic bearing than the world does. I like how it concludes Bruno's stories, and in terms of the power-up to save the day resolution, I think it works better for aforementioned reasons of being previously established in more concrete ways than Jotaro's. And I find the end result to be way more memorable too. Diavolo ostensibly died from a drug addict, his KO levels are fitted in defeat, except of course he now lives the nightmare of an eternity of dying in new and unforeseen ways. But even with all that praise, Stardust Crusaders' final fight just curbs it. The immediate sense of dread and fear in first encounter Dio was palpable. Every living member of the Crusaders got some memorable moment to contribute, with Kakyoin's being the most memorable, and in most fights would have been the highlight, but Jotaro's double bluff with the magnets and time stop is among the strongest moments of subterfuge in the entire series. The scale of the fight is fittingly massive, at least in comparison to the previous encounters, with a huge playing field. Dio trolling with his powers is a constant sense of amusement. Jotaro approaching Dio to beat him up is one of the most iconic moments of the series for a reason. Again, I do find the resolution a bit unsatisfying, but there's still no denying that this is an epic fight. For what it's worth though, I would take the Sleeping Slaves arc over the world.
Shake it like you mean it, baby. Come on and dance with it. Come on. Shake it like you mean it, baby. Come on and dance with it.
Sans the final fight, Golden Wind does serve as a better version of Stardust Crusaders. Obviously, both have their own unique elements to them, a stronger willingness to indulge in wacky comedy for Stardust Crusaders, or a strong thematic focus like in Golden Wind, but there's no better indication of Araki's growth as a mangaka than by comparing Golden Wind with Stardust Crusaders, since it provides the most points for comparison. I could have also tackled the main cast as a whole themselves, but I feel like due to the heavier focus on backstory in Golden Wind, that wasn't really fair to Stardust Crusaders, and also this is already long enough. It's for that same reason that I decided against including a segment dedicated to discussing the anime adaptations of both parts, which I would definitely give the nod to Golden Wind, thanks in large parts to the sometimes breathtaking art design, absolutely brilliant second OP, and the aforementioned La Squadra anime-only scenes. I think I've made my point, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. I don't know how to end videos.